Scriabin has also been called a sensualist. And we all know the poem of Ecstasy. What do you think his Danse Languide or Désir, perhaps, for instance, meant to him, and what do they mean to you?
Well, there's no doubt that Scriabin was an extremely erotic man. He was very dissolute and dissipated and corrupt when he was a young man. As for drinking, for instance, Safonov once said that Scriabin, when he was 20, had already drunk enough to last him for an entire lifetime. And people of that time felt that Scriabin's corruption was like the corruption of a saint, a stage of life, an experience of the devil that has to be lived through before you can really go to the dramatic heights of illumination, of spiritualism, of spirituality rather. But Scriabin was acutely aware of the sexual element. He once said, the trouble with Parsifal, the reason why Parsifal is not as good as Tristan, is that Wagner was sexually spent by the time he wrote Parsifal. Parsifal was the work of an old man. And but the thing that's very puzzling to pianists is how to convey this erotic element in Scriabin. It's a very difficult problem. One of the difficulties of Scriabin is, as Balmont again, the poet, he once said, when Scriabin plays, it's no longer a piano, it's a beautiful woman, and he is caressing her. Now, Scriabin has to be played like a woman. And yet, women who play like men never play Scriabin well. And I think your greatest pianist and your greatest Scriabinists are homosexual. It's certainly common gossip in those circles. But aside from that, because the reason for that, if I can digress for a moment, is that Scriabin was interested in the divine androgyne, when men and women were one. When people were neuter, but when male sexuality and female sexuality, male polarity and female polarity were contained within a single individual. According to Greek myth, that is the way the human race originally was. And that it was only later that the two separated into male and female. And Scriabin wanted to fuse those, and in a way, homosexuality brings back a taste of that, of the man within the woman within the man as one. Whatever the abnormality of the fact as pathology may be, emotionally it conveys this feeling. Now, pianists are always stunned, because when you play the Poème Languide or the Danse Languide, theoretically, you should think of it as post-coital languor, the fatigue after the sexual act. But to Scriabin and in the music, it is absolutely the opposite of that. The Poème Languide is an erectile piece of music. It is the languor of growing sexuality. It's a masculine erection, I believe. And Désir is another case in point. You think of desire in the sense of longing. You think of a Wagnerian portamento, a dominant ninth resolving or suspended in space, a longing, a hankering, a reaching out. But Désir, even as Scriabin himself played it, is terribly tiny. It's like the taste of sperm. It is a sexual act uncharged by the romantic emotion of Abelard calling for Eloise, or Robert Browning rushing Elizabeth Barrett into a hasty marriage. It's a far more sexual rather than sensual concept. And the poem of ecstasy, of course, made history because it is not only spiritual ecstasy, but it is an orgasm, and it was originally called Poème orgiaque, by which Scriabin meant not an orgy in that sense at all, but meant an orgasm. That's good. And in this connection, there are two things I'd like to say. Another new note, a new flavor that Scriabin put into music was the concept of flight. He wrote a lot of poèmes ailés and dance of wings, and at one point in 1914 he started a symphony which was to be called Icarus, symbolizing the flight of man to the sun. But Scriabin, the winged note in Scriabin is not the sort of fluttering of hummingbird wings. It's more like an airplane propeller. In fact, in Icarus, he actually scored it with an airplane propeller. And the little poem Ailé, Opus 51, is it? Opus 51, number 3. That is a very harsh piece of music. It's played, it's not like a thrush at twilight suddenly taking flight. It's more like the flapping of wings against a window of a bird trying to escape from a room.
Quite distinguished from the Chopin F major A2 that's linked to this by some people.
Oh, really? Which A2?
In the Opus 10 in F major. You know?
Yes, it actually, this poem Ailé is closer to that, which has very little to do with flight, than it is to our concept of what a winged poem, which is the literal translation of this, would be. Do you follow me? Have I been clear, or am I confused?
Yeah, well, Scriabin seemed to be, at least his music seemed to be concerned with this, what you've called in your book, lift.
Right. Подъем in Russian. And it's a surging of the spirit. And that it can sometimes be harsh, which to me is surprising. Maybe it's not surprising to you or to others. And another point is that very often, or on a couple of occasions in Scriabin music, you'll see the marking pathetico, pathetic. That pathos is not in our sense, but is in the Greek sense, and in the Russian sense of paphos, which is a yearning, a surging towards. So one is not to play it like a whine, but to play it like a striving towards a goal. I'm speaking of the D sharp minor, Opus 8, number 12, and there's another question. Oh,
I was going to say, well, that reminds me immediately of the D sharp minor A2, which is played frequently in quite very different manner, heroically on the one hand, and dramatically, virtuosistically, whatever.
Well, Scriabin intended that as a longing, as a yearning, as a mood, not as a war horse the way Van Cliburn plays it. Something about Van Cliburn that interests me very much is here's a man who has made his reputation made his reputation on Russian music. Without Russia, Sir Van Cliburn would be unknown. And yet he has never bothered to learn more than the Scriabin war horses that he played when he was a student at the Juilliard. The etude in thirds, the D-sharp in major thirds, the D-sharp minor etude, the left hand showpieces, the nocturne for left hand alone. And I think that's disgraceful.
Well, they're not really representative of the what we might call the real Scriabin.
Well, it's hard to say the real Scriabin, because Scriabin was many people and many kinds of music. Certainly they are gorgeous pieces of music, but they're threadbare now. They've been overplayed too many, they've been heard too many times, and it's time to move on. And it's amazing that a man like Van Cliburn, who is the voice of Russia within America, within American music, should never have learned a major Scriabin. Wait, let me finish. But maybe he's like Gilels and hates Scriabin. Richter adores Scriabin, Gilels hates him. And in the great grand prize Tchaikovsky competition, a Scriabin sonata is an alternate. It's not compulsory, but you're supposed to either learn a Scriabin sonata or a Prokofiev sonata. Alexander Goldenweiser, that great late pianist who for many years, when I was in Russia at least, was the head of the Moscow Conservatory, was very bitter on this subject. He said at a big music conference, Shostakovich was there, Khachaturian was there, the whole bunch. And he said, it's outrageous. The West takes Prokofiev and plays Prokofiev as if he belonged to them, and they utterly ignore Scriabin, who is so much greater a genius, which is true. I like Prokofiev very much, but Scriabin was an innovator and one of the titans of the music world. Whereas Prokofiev, well, I don't think Prokofiev extended the world's vision of music very far.
Well, then we have come to the understanding that a great deal more must be understood than the mere notes on the printed page. However, there is one particular piece that stumps me in a way, and that's the Waltz Opus 38. To me, and this comes between the fourth and the fifth sonata, which were Opus 30 and Opus 53, respectively. And this waltz is sort of, you might say, cocktailish. How do you relate this particular piece in the midst of the other pieces, Scriabin?
It was the last waltz Scriabin ever wrote. And it was at a turning point in his life. It was written at the same time as the fourth sonata, at the same time as the poem satanique, at the same time as the poem tragique, at the same time as the divine poem. All of these pieces were composed in 1903 because Scriabin wanted to leave Russia because he felt he wasn't understood, and he wanted to live with his mistress. He also wanted to get rid of his first wife, who wouldn't divorce him, and live with his mistress, who truly understood him and loved the later Scriabin rather than the early Scriabin. And he composed this enormous batch of fantastic music in this very short space of time. Now, originally, this waltz was conceived as a grande valse fantasia, and but he just couldn't go any further with it, and just publish this middle section of it, which is the best part of it, the crux of the piece. And it is salon. It's the last, well, not the last, but it was one of the last of the salon pieces. And it's perhaps look at it this way, that it's a farewell to the early Scriabin, because he never returned to that genre of giving his autograph at a party, which is what music like that is. It's a sort of a signature. It's a sort of a charming thing to do with a bunch of friends. And remember, in those days, after all, Scriabin's dates are 1871 to 1915. In those days, waltzes and polkas and mazurkas and cotillions were all very much a part of the life. And when Scriabin was a little boy of 10, 11, 12, 13, going to the cadet corps in Moscow, the cadets used to surround him and threaten to tickle him, which was what he hated most in life, if he wouldn't improvise waltzes and fashionable dances of the day so that the boys could all dance around the piano together and have a good time. So these dance rhythms were basic to Scriabin, as they were to Chopin, obviously, and as they also were to Bach, remember. The gigue is a dance, and so is the sarabande.
Do you feel that Scriabin was handicapped in any way in his later compositions in being able to notate them exactly the way he wanted, as has been suggested?
Was suggested by whom?
Sister, whatever her name is.
Well, what does she say? I don't remember what she says.
Do you feel that there was a limitation there?
Well, yes, but I think it's true of every composer, but particularly true in Scriabin's case, because Scriabin felt very strongly the enharmonic differences. He heard F sharp in one way and G flat in another way, and he wanted to work out a double keyboard in which there could be this difference actually played, but it would, it would mean a massive piano of 24 keys instead of 12 to the octave. And so nothing ever came of that. But all his life he wanted to expand the possibilities of piano notation. And much of what he wrote simply couldn't be written down on paper. That's why it's very important for the pianist who's studying Scriabin to listen to the Russians, because there is a tradition of Russian performance of Scriabin which is direct from Scriabin himself. For instance, Sofronitsky, Vladimir Sofronitsky, a professor at the Moscow Conservatory who died in 1966, I think, never met Scriabin, although he married Scriabin's daughter later, but he heard Scriabin, and he has given thousands of all Scriabin concerts. Rachmaninoff, too, gave all Scriabin concerts. In fact, the first concert that Rachmaninoff ever played of music other than his own, that is Rachmaninoff's music, was the all Scriabin concerts in 1915, immediately after Scriabin died and his widow was destitute and the children were destitute. So he did a Volga tour of all the major cities on the Volga River, playing nothing but Scriabin. And the audience would say sometimes, "Play something of yours," and he would say, "Сегодня вечером только Scriabin." Tonight only Scriabin. And that is what began Rachmaninoff's concert career, because up to that point he was thought of only as a composer who only played his own music. But the Scriabin tradition is a very real thing. There is a way that he should be played, and many of these things which are not actually written in the music or can't be deciphered can be heard in the performance by Sofronitsky, by Beckman Szczerbina, who was actually a pupil of Scriabin's, and some of her records are available at the Four Continents bookstore here in New York on Fifth Avenue, number 656. And but Scriabin is difficult. You know, Howard Klein, who is one of the best music critics in this entire country. He used to be with the New York Times, and I think he was kidnapped by High Fidelity, or one of these reviews that paid much more money. Howard Klein said to me once that it was absolutely amazing. He's a pianist himself. He said, "You can put any score in front of me of a piece of music, and I will be able to figure out more or less how it should go." But he said, when Horowitz was going to play the 10th Sonata, I pulled it out, pulled a copy of it out and put it on the piano and looked at it, and he said, I didn't know how to play it. I didn't know what to do with it. So even for a profound musician like Howard Klein, it is difficult to block Scriabin's music out. Once you get the key to it, it's very simple. The themes are there, the chordal incrustations, conglomerations are there. The formula, the form is almost schematic. 4 measures, 8 measures, and the reprises, the recapitulations all come within a period, and all of the latter sonatas end with a cosmic dance, a sort of a disintegrated prestissimo, where the notes simply fly out from the piano like sparks from a stirred fire.
But what about rhythm? There are measures which one is almost drawn to play rubato and not in strict time because of the 5 against 4 and all the alternating complexities of the rhythm. Is this wrong to compress or extend measures?
If it sounds right to your intuition, it can't be wrong. If it works in the concert hall, it will not be wrong. But at the root, you've got to get your compound meters absolutely accurate. Your 2s against 3s, your 3s against 4s, your 3s against 5, and in vers la flamme, your 5 against 9s. Must be absolutely metrically accurate. You start from there. Then you can loosen up a bit. Now, Scriabin was an erratic pianist when it came to rhythm. 2 words were always used by critics whenever they heard him play. One was capricious, another was arrhythmical. But they took, he made those Velta Mignon piano rolls, and some Soviet musicologists checked those with a metronome. And they found that he would have a certain metronomic marking, that Scriabin actually would play in the beginning a little slower than the metronomic marking, and at the end a little faster than the metronomic marking. So that in the end, the average was exactly as he had marked it. So if you set your inner meter, keep that going. But this is true of all music. Set your inner meter and keep it steady, and within that inner steadiness, then you can be capricious, then you can be arrhythmical, then you can use all the rubato you like. But let's see, there was another thing I wanted to say which I've completely forgotten. But never mind.
Now, in the discography of your book, you've indicated a very few very fine Scriabin performances, very scant indeed. One of them is Giesking's performance of the poem Opus...
What, Opus 15 in E flat?
No. The F sharp. 32.
Oh, poem of 32, number 1. Or number 2, number 1.
No, let's fix that
Yeah.
up. You wanted to talk about Giesking, I think.
Oh, well, what do you want to know about? Oh, well, Giesking was one of the really great Scriabin performers. He had an enormous affinity for him. Perhaps it was the homosexual thing, I don't know, it might be. But he played him delicately, he played him accurately, he played him precisely, and yet with a warmth and an affection that made Scriabin very beautiful and very much at his best.
He even performed.
And he also performed on records which you may have heard. Oh, but he also performed in concert. The big works like the 5th Sonata and the 9th Sonata. Wait. You know who introduced the 5th Sonata? Who was the first to play the 5th Sonata outside Russia, outside of Scriabin? Arthur Rubinstein. Yeah. You say, no, at this point say, yes, I do know, I've read your book. Arthur Rubinstein in London in 19...
And why doesn't he play Scriabin anymore, except perhaps for, does he play the left hand nocturne? I don't know.
No. It's now so far in his past, and he's now got his established repertoire, which he just goes on playing. And he's turned into a Chopinist. Arthur Rubinstein, you know, in the beginning wasn't a very good pianist at all. It's just that he's lived so long, and age has deepened him, that he's become a monument. But his type of playing is very un-Scriabinic. Arthur Rubinstein called on Scriabin once and said, I want to become a Scriabinist. I want to play Scriabin. And Scriabin said, great, fine. And then in the course of the talk, he said, you know, Rubinstein said, I adore Brahms. And Scriabin said to him, well, how can you like Brahms and want to become a Scriabinist? Which ended that interview. Rubinstein was only 17 at the time.
How about Catherine Ruth Hayman? Was she wrapped up in all phases of music, or mostly modern things? And how did she play Scriabin?
Catherine Ruth Hayman's teacher was the same teacher as Arthur Rubinstein's, Heinrich Barth in Berlin. She played very beautifully and was tremendously attuned to Scriabin, but she lacked a certain kind of virtuosity. She lacked a certain brilliance of technique which would have given her a much bigger reputation than she actually had. She and I gave a joint concert of Scriabin sonatas once when I was very young, and Paul Rosenfeld, the best music critic that America has ever produced, came and was very sweet about it. And he was a great admirer of Kitty Hayman's playing, because she was the only one who played major Scriabin at a time that one wanted very much to hear it, and there weren't people doing it at the time.
I have been reading a fascinating book called Die Kunst des Klavierspiels. That's the German translation of a book by Heinrich Neuhaus. And I've been astonished to see that he performed all of the 10 sonatas of Scriabin and the concerto, among many other works.
Heinrich Neuhaus is the bedrock of the Scriabin tradition in Russia today. Neuhaus has the distinction of having been the teacher of not only Sviatoslav Richter, but of Emil Gilels too. So he was an extremely competent man, and he was a terrific Scriabinist. His performance of the concerto, for instance, is absolutely the perfect performance. Wonderful virtuoso, and a man of tremendous understanding of music. Explains
The technical, what?
Technical notes. You want me to say this?
Technical notes, yeah.
You want me to say this?
The name of the piece.
Take the poem Opus 71, number 2. You have your little broken arpeggio, as the example will show. Now that B flat must be played...
in the first measure.
In the first measure. That B flat must also be played with the thumb, because the thumb is thick, the thumb is heavy, the thumb gives added richness to that tone, which already has a Scriabin stress mark on it, and that is to carry through. Because if you sort of cross over your finger and put a second finger or something like that up there, it's thinner, it's more pinched, and you have all the time in the world. This is one of his dreamy pieces. It's a sweet piece to be played in a dream. Then later, where it's marked with enthusiasm, when you see that octave, that G-sharp octave with a trill, you may struggle with a trill between the 4th and 5th fingers, or even between 3rd and 5th fingers, but there's no need. You simply loop up your G-sharps and trill with your 2nd and 3rd, which are faster, more nervous in their reflexes, and easier to trill, and then come back.
Measure 12.
Measure 12.
Opening of the 7th sonata is an example of the pedal held through the first two measures, as referred to before.
Do you think so?
Yeah.
A very interesting exercise as to how tones should be matched like pearls, and some unevenly balanced, is the opening measure of the etude in sevenths, in minor sevenths. Major sevenths. Major sevenths.
Major.
Opus 65, number 2. That the left hand has got to be smooth as velvet, with almost no stress. And then your sevenths, always let your thumb, don't sing your top melody, let the thumb, the lower, in the right hand, be the dominant thing, because the top melody will be strengthened by will resound from the very strength of the thumb, carrying the inner melody of it. Then, where you have your big arpeggio at the end of the second measure, how to balance those? Is it to be played totally smoothly? That you have to experiment. Don't thump your F double sharp, and find out whether it's going to be the E sharp or the B or the E, which is going to be the center of the fulcrum, or the stamen or pistil of the flower that the whole chord spreads from. Actually, it should be the E.
Of course, all this...
The E sharp, rather.
All this business of the balancing of the tones is wasted on a piano that's not in tune, right?
Oh, yes, but you must never fool around pianos that aren't in tune. You should always have your piano in tune.
Yeah, well, even in concert you find a lot of pianos that are not in tune.
Mm.
But I think it's particularly...
Well, do like Michelangelo and bring your own tuner and have him come out between numbers and strengthen it up. No, but even if your piano is out of tune, the question of balance still can work out, and you can still practice the discovering what notes of emphasis within one of these voluptuous chords sets up the vibration.
My point is that it's not going to be quite as voluptuous if the piano is not in the greatest tune.
No, of course.
Don't you think?
No, of course not. You're quite right.
Particularly in Scriabin.
Right.
What else? Off. What are the first steps for the budding pianist to learn Scriabin? What a terrible thing. Where should he begin?
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that. Well, Scriabin is so tremendously difficult, it's like, I feel like saying, you begin at the end. After you're already a consummate virtuoso, then start your Scriabin studies. But of course, that's not really fair to say.
How about with Donald Garvelmann's anthology, priced $3, available from P.O. Box?
But it's not available yet. I think that one must turn to the etudes, Opus 42. They are pretty difficult, but they're very beautiful. I think you should hear Richter's record called Richter Plays Scriabin Etudes, and pick the etude from Opus 42 that you like best, and then work on it. Scriabin wrote some of the most beautiful melodies in the world. I think the etude Opus 42 number 4 is really one of the loveliest, sweetest compositions that man's ever conceived. Of course, the etude Opus 42 number 5 is terribly popular because it's the virtuosi like it, although it's marked affinato, which means breathlessly, and should be played very nervously and rather timidly. But its form is very simple because it's just the same pattern repeated 3 times with a melodic interlude. Now, another important thing about Scriabin is you must bring intelligence to bear. Well, the difference between a bad pianist and a good pianist is that when a good pianist plays, you can hear him thinking. You know that the brain has operated, that he's saying something in a new way. He's casting a new light. He's shedding on the genius of the composer the sparkle of his own mind. And so these lines, these melodies, these sentences of music must be very clearly said, and said somewhat in your own language, so that it is you as well as Scriabin which is being brought to bear. Oh, no, wait. Now, there are certain terribly simple things like the danced caress and désir, which are fine little practice pieces to begin with. And anyone can cope with them.
That's sort of a good ending in a way. Leads them on to the music.
Okay. And even in advanced Scriabin, there's Opus 63, which is the poem called Mask, which is very simple and can be played by someone with no technique whatsoever, but it is very difficult to make it, to get across. This is one of the demonic Scriabin things. This is one of the pieces where evil comes in, and to get that sourness of wickedness into the piece is extremely difficult, but it's charming simply as sound. And remember, don't play it too slowly. Okay, I can't do it one minute. Oh, here's the famous one. This is the great pedal exercise, Opus 58. Oh, and these arpeggiated basses, and there you see your...
Name the piece.
Well, the Feuillet d'Albin, Opus 58. Absolutely the seminal piece for later Scriabin. It was done at the time of Prometheus, and is the beginning of the final Scriabin pieces, where you have these wonderful, look at that pedal marking, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 measures of perhaps 25 notes, different notes, all on one pedal. Oh, shit, I'm sorry. 2 measures and 2 measures. But look at this second measure, all of those different notes, perhaps, 8 different notes, 8 different actual G sharps, B sharps, D sharps, all including these D sharp and C double sharp, these little half tones which sort of just buzz, they're so close together, all on one pedal, and yet these 2 half tones must still be perfectly clear. And then as you come out of the pedal, it has to open up like a ray of sunshine after the rain into the clarity of yet a new sonority. And again, these arpeggiated basses have to be so delicately done, and should simply be practiced. Always, as you see, there is Scriabin's minor 7th and augmented 4th. No matter how he's written it enharmonically, it's the C, B flat, E conflagration, constellation. And that is basic in all later Scriabin. Here again, you have to practice over and over to find out where are your tones of emphasis. Now, Scriabin has marked 2 points of stress, but that is to give you a melodic, a counter melody to your top F sharp.
2 points of stress in the left hand.
In the left hand, right. But this is a piece that could be studied and practiced on for a long, long time to find exactly where the right adjustments are to be made, where the right tonal balances are to be made. Now, you will practice this extremely slowly, but remember, when the decisions are finally made and when it is actually played, it is marked delicatezza, which implies a good amount of speed, no sloppy, soupy lingering over it. It must drip like icicles in a very hot sunlight and get on with it. I've used that so many times. Okay, I'm so sick of hearing that voice I could die, which we'll have to put in somewhere. There is the school of piano players, as I said before, who believe that it's nothing but ivory and steel and ebony and flesh and bone. But there are so many different ways of attacking these tones, and Scriabin's music is particularly sensitive to this. I was criticized for writing in my book that the ghostly little chorale that Scriabin inserts in the funeral march of his first sonata, Opus 6, I said that it should be played depressing the keys only part way and at half pedal. And a pianist friend of mine said, but this is absurd, because a key goes all the way down even if you only half depress it, and the pedal, if it's only half down, still catches the whole resonance, the whole sustaining of the note. But that is not true. I myself, in the good old days when I played it that way, and it does give a ghostly coloration, and it does sound like a choir of angels interrupting this funeral march, which is exactly what Scriabin had meant. Oh, have you turned that on?
You want it on?
Well, the Feuillet d'Albin, or album leaf, was a very special thing, which, and Scriabin wrote about 4 or 5 of them.
58.
No, I'm talking in general about the Feuillet d'Albin.
Oh.
It was a very special kind of music. They were little autographs that he would write into a fan's autograph album, and they literally were album leaves. And there's a particularly interesting one which he wrote in 1905, which is being published in your collection of early Scriabin works, and which is being reproduced here, which he wrote for the widows and orphans of indigent musicians. It's in the notes there. We'll have to check this out. And damn it, I forget who he wrote this Feuillet d'Albin Opus 58 for, but I'll check into all of that. But there should, I'm only telling you this, Donald, because there should be a little note about what album leaves are in the course of our conversation. Okay.
But that particular album leaf sort of got lost in the process because it was one of the later compositions without an opus number.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Yeah. And it was given privately, as an autograph is given. It's not all album leaves theoretically shouldn't even be published, because they're given to a person as a compliment. And Scriabin, just as Scriabin in his young days would, on very fancy music paper, which was wreathed in vine leaves and embossed little colored decorative patterns around the edges of the paper, he would write a little waltz or something dedicated to a pretty girl and tie it with a ribbon and hand it over as a little present when he called for tea.